David Gaunt was an ordinary poor man, yet he handled millions of dollars for 16 hours a day, while his own pockets remained empty. David was actually a supervisor for an armored car company called Loomis Fargo, and his job was to transport millions of dollars between banks. All day he would guard this money, but his own salary was barely $8 an hour. But how long could he live under the heavy blanket of honesty, stifling his dream? One day, fed up with this life of integrity, David considered doing something wrong. This is the intriguing story of the 1997 Loomis Fargo bank heist, in which an ordinary man forced the FBI to launch an international manhunt, and this very story became the basis for the 2016 Hollywood film Masterminds. Astonishingly, David Gaunt himself even worked on the film based on his own story, and unfortunately, he wasn't paid for it. David Gaunt was a retired soldier from the Gulf War, protected his country, and now he was a vault supervisor at Loomis Fargo, an armored car company. This meant money in his hands, empty pockets.
The loneliness and the frustration of not achieving anything big eating away at him from the inside.
These were the circumstances that created a strange restlessness in David's heart, and eventually, he started having bad thoughts. The moment the thought of dishonesty entered his mind, a new path opened up for him to take this wrong step, and this path was named Kelly Campbell. Kelly also worked at Loomis Fargo. She was a sharp, bold, and mysterious girl. During their time working at Loomis Fargo, she and David became friends, and they often met after office hours. Their friendship was so deep that even after Kelly left the job, they continued to meet. One day, Kelly introduced David to a friend of hers, Steve Chambers. Steve was a small-time criminal who always dreamed of making money. When Steve found out that David was an armored vehicle supervisor at Loomis Fargo, a crazy idea was born in his mind, the idea of robbing
The place.
But to make this idea a success, it was necessary for David to join them, and so the two of them began their attempts to persuade David. David Gaunt, whose intentions were already shaky, found Steve Chambers' idea to be like pushing a collapsing wall. At first, David was very scared because he had never done anything wrong in his life before. But Steve's approach compelled him to falter. He showed David dreams of a prosperous and luxurious life. David's life frustrations, Kelly's support, and Steve's greed all combined to bring David to a point of no return. Now, since Steve himself was a small-time criminal, Kelly had no experience, and as for David, well, what can be said about him? Consequently, their plan was so absurd it would make any professional thief laugh. The plan was quite simple. On the night of October 4, 1997, after his shift, David would stay in the vault, he would turn off the security cameras, he would steal the cassette tapes, and after that, he would fill the company van with cash and flee. The plan was that after the robbery, David would immediately take $50,000 and escape to Mexico. This amount was chosen because at that time it was the only amount allowed to be taken across the American border. All the remaining cash would stay with Steve Chambers, and after things cooled down, David would return, and the money would be distributed equally among them. But there was a problem here. The plan had a huge flaw. If David took such a big risk to flee to Mexico with only $50,000, why would Steve have the rest of the looted money, ever share it with David later? But the blindfold of greed had made David blind. He never thought about this. And finally, that night arrived. On the evening of October 4, 1997 at 6 p.m., David sent his trainee staff home. Now he was alone with the responsibility of the vault. A frightened David went inside the vault and, according to the plan, disabled 2 security cameras. He also took out the tapes that contained all the recordings. But by mistake, he forgot to turn off a third camera that was hidden in a corner of the vault. The third camera continued to record the entire scene of the Loomis Fargo robbery for the next few hours. Completely unaware of this, David began to take cash from the vault. But there was another problem. This time, he wasn't taking the cash to transport it, he had to empty the entire vault, all at once and completely alone. Most of these were $20 bills. According to an estimate, there were more than 8,000 bundles. It would also take a lot of time to load so many bundles into the van. For the next 2 hours, he continued to fill the van with cash. After loading approximately $17.3 million in cash, he had no idea at that moment that he had just committed the second largest robbery in American history. After all the cash was loaded into the van, David danced with joy, and this dance was also recorded on the third camera. The next morning, when the other Loomis Fargo employees arrived and trying to open the vault keys were missing. The police were called, and since only David Gaunt was not present in the office, he became the prime suspect from the very beginning. When the security camera footage was reviewed, all suspicion turned to certainty, and David's dance, in the end, was like adding fuel to the fire. Security footage showed that David was repeatedly paging someone during the robbery. This proved that he was definitely not alone in this crime. And the police then began their search for David Gaunt and his accomplices. After searching the entire city for the next 2 days, FBI agents found the cash van parked in a forest. Inside the van, about $3 million in cash was still lying there, which had probably been left behind due to its heavy weight and a lack of time. Sets from both CCTV cameras were also found in the van. This meant that David and his accomplices now had about $14 million in cash. Most of these were $20 bills, which were not marked, meaning they couldn't be tracked if they were spent. Meanwhile, according to the plan, David had fled to Mexico with $50,000. He arrived at a luxury beach resort there and started living. To find David and his accomplices, the police and the FBI published advertisements in newspapers. They also promised a reward of $500,000 to anyone who provided information related to the robbery. The police appealed to citizens to immediately report any person in their area who suddenly seemed to have come into a lot of money. Because of this campaign, the police started receiving a lot of calls throughout the day. The police were forced to arrange a separate desk for the Loomis Fargo robbery. Most of the calls were just people trying their luck, but there was one call that put wheels under the stalled investigation. The person told the police that his neighbor had suddenly come into a lot of money. This was none other than Steve Chambers, who was the mastermind of the entire plan. The FBI secretly started keeping an eye on him. They found that Steve couldn't contain himself, and along with his wife Michelle, he had bought a big, expensive house. They were also spending a lot of money on a new BMW car and other luxurious items. The FBI checked their bank accounts and found that they had suddenly deposited a lot of money after the 4th of October. Their suspicion became even stronger when the bank teller told them that they had brought the money in the form of $20 bills. Michelle, who had come to deposit the money, had also asked the teller how much money could be deposited without being reported to the feds. The FBI's suspicion now turned into certainty that, if not anyone else, Steve Chambers and his wife Michelle were definitely David's accomplices. But they remained silent and wanted to find the other accomplices, especially David. Just about 10 days had passed in the investigation when everything came to light. To get to the bottom of the story, the FBI started tapping Steve Chambers' phone. During a phone call conversation, the name David Gaunt made the FBI's ears perk up. This phone call was between Steve Chambers and a man named Mike McKinney. They were actually plotting to murder David. In reality, Steve Chambers had gone crazy seeing so much money. He wanted to get David killed in Mexico and keep all the money for himself. The FBI arrested Mike McKinney, who immediately spilled the entire plan. Mike revealed that David was in Mexico, and that after stealing the cash from Loomis Fargo, they had taken the van to the parking lot of the Reynolds printing press and shifted the cash to another car there. Surprisingly, Steve worked at this very printing press. He didn't even think about transferring the cash in a secluded, unknown location. And because they had very little time, too much cash, and a completely worthless plan, they left the $3 million in the van and parked it in the forest. They didn't even bother to leave the van somewhere far away. This forest was right next to Steve's office and just a few kilometers from the Loomis Fargo warehouse. On March 1, 1998, David Gaunt was arrested in Mexico. The next day, Steve Chambers, his wife Michelle, and Kelly Campbell were arrested in Charlotte, North Carolina. The FBI recovered 88% of the stolen money, while Steve Chambers had spent the rest of the money on luxury items. Steve Chambers was sentenced to 11 years in prison, and David Gaunt was sentenced to 7 years. David was also billed for the missing $3 million that he hadn't even spent. In 2016, a movie called Masterminds was made based on this story. The film's producer hired David Gaunt as a consultant, but he didn't receive any salary because, legally, any money David earned would be used to pay off his debt. At this time, David worked a construction job and said that he couldn't pay off this debt even if he worked for the rest of his life. Today, David Gaunt lives with his wife and children in Jacksonville, Florida, and works as a construction worker. Hey there, don't forget to like and subscribe.